I love all these flows.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event this evening, Unpacking the ABA Debate. My name's Scott Brown. I'm the Director of Information and Family Support at the ARC of King County. And I just wanted to kind of pick us off. Zach is going to sort of introduce the event and what we'll be talking about tonight. But I just wanted to sort of set the stage before we go ahead and dive in with a couple of ground rules. I want to say thank you for being here for this crucial discussion. Again, the title is Unpacking the ABA Debate. We know that this is a topic that comes with a lot of emotional investment, and we know this because we've gotten feedback directly about it as the ARC and as panelists and as folks that are in the community. Because of this feedback, we want to start out by making it clear that at the ARC of King County, our role is to present all different types of information that can benefit our community from multiple perspectives and positionalities. So we've seen this tension play out firsthand, and knowing that there's a high chance for tension in this discussion, we really want to make sure that we're highlighting some of these ground rules to ensure people's safety, to ensure respect amongst one another. So I'm just going to go through and read a couple of ground rules that we're going to just sort of set with. So first, the purpose of the event is to bring people together with a goal of fostering understanding and respect. We have our own staff supporting this event by monitoring the chat and the question and answer section. Under no circumstances hurtful language or direct attacks on panelists acceptable, and participants who use any directed hurtful language will have to be removed from the chat, and we'll kind of take the liberty to do that if we're seeing hurtful language come through in the chat area. The second point I want to make is that while the word debate is in the title of our event, this event is not a debate in itself. It's an event to share information about both sides of a conflict that continues to be present in our community, in the disability community. There's no intention of there being a winner in this ongoing discussion, right? The third point that we want to make is that under no circumstance are panelists or speakers to be harassed before or after the event. We, as the ARC of King County, take the safety of our community very seriously. So our speakers may or may not wish to share their contact information after the conclusion of the event. And for speakers who don't wish to share that information, please respect that. It seems kind of obvious and it seems like it should go without saying, but we have to say this because we've seen it happen before. We're not kind of making this up. We've had panelists being contacted. So please, 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 please respect that and think critically before you make decisions about contacting folks. The fourth point is please be mindful while sharing information versus opinion. The ARC of King County works really hard to avoid the spread of misinformation and will continue to work hard to do that during this event. We also recognize that the line is really blurry between opinion and facts in this discussion. And given that it's not so black and white, we're gonna just have to do our best to evenly weigh in on both sides of this discussion. So just know that we're trying hard to do that. And then finally, please use the chat feature for comments and using the question and answer area. We're gonna do our best to monitor it. There's a lot of us in here, so we're gonna do what we can to get as much answered as possible. Please, just know that we're doing our best here. And please, I would also just say there's a lot that could pop up in the chat. The purpose of the event is to hear from our panelists. So my hope is that folks will keep their attention on the panelists as opposed to the chat and opposed to like engaging in a lot of discussion in the chat. We've really intentionally worked to have the panelists that we have today, and they have a lot of really good information. So please, please, please keep your attention directed on them. That's really all I have to say. I'm going to keep my mouth closed for the rest of this, but thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it on to Zach Sadiq to introduce the event.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And thank you all so much for being here, panelists and audience members. My name's Zach Sadiq. I am a autistic social worker. I work over at the ARC of King County, who's putting on this event. And I do a lot of community organizing work with autistic people in Washington State and otherwise. One of my driving motivations is to increase the autistic voice and representation in, all matters and places and, policies that impact us. And I think it's fair to say that ABA is a very prominent force within the autistic community and, discussions about autistic people for good or bad. And the reason why we're here today doing this panel is to, center autistic voices and, following the principles of disability justice, centering the voices of those most impacted. We've got a great panel of folks today, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. I will also say that, all of the panelists and myself are, all white folks, and that definitely impacts our experience with autism, our experience with, how we're perceived or treated. And, I just wanted to name that because the experience of autistic folks of color is often much different. And yeah, cool. So we have some very amazing panelists here, and I'm wondering if y'all, want to introduce yourselves. So what's your connection with autism? What's your experience with ABA been like? And, what brought you here to this panel today? Awen or Alex, which one of you wants to go first?
I can do it. Saw hesitation. I actually have an interesting, I think, intersection of ABA and autism because ultimately it was working in ABA that led me to my diagnosis, despite the many road signs, such as having an IEP, sensory issues, social difficulties, particularly coming from a rural part of the country where obviously there aren't as many opportunities for diagnosis, and also being female, there weren't as many signs to the community at large. After the third professor, while I was seeking out my BCBA, pointed out that I stim in class and therefore it is a totally normal behavior. And also after one of my BTs asked if I was on the spectrum, and also I think it was ultimately using assessment tools to assess my clients and finding that I was supposed to teach skills I did not have. At that point, I was put in contact with you, Zach, and you graciously invited me to join a Square Pegs meeting after a wonderful discussion around why we don't hear non-speaking advocates as often as we should, and to sit in a room surrounded by people who particularly were female presenting and also a wide variety of ages, discuss things that were my own stims, my own patterns of behavior, was really life-altering. That being said, I didn't actually get my diagnosis until this year. My partner's promised me a cake that says, "Congrats, you have autism." But ultimately, I'm here for the conversation because I think that we as providers should be listening to the people we provide to. If we cannot listen to the people we provide to, and it is our job to support the autistic community, who's going to model for that for us in the community at large? And I think if I've spent so much time trying to communicate with my clients, my peers, to teach them skills to say, this hurts me, or I was wronged, then those are the voices that we should be listening to. And it's really important to me to collaborate with them and to do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Awen. You've always been someone I've learned so much from, and I'm really glad you're here to share your wisdom today. So thank you. Alex, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Alex Detzner. I am an autistic first and foremost, but I'm also a BCBA here in the Western Washington area. I too, Awen and my stories mirror each other in a lot of ways in that we were both diagnosed this year. And so working in ABA is actually, it's a smaller part of my diagnosis story. I flew so far under the radar that it was just trying to figure out how to do my job effectively and how to exist in the world in a more effective way that led me down the road towards seeking diagnosis. I didn't have an IEP in school. I truly was not on anybody's radar for any kind of services or anything. I just existed. Sometimes we mask so hard. And I am here because I feel extremely passionate about elevating the voices of autistics within the field of ABA. The phrase that is used so often, "nothing about us without us," it's couldn't be more true anywhere beyond ABA. It's the just a hugely funded area of support for autistic individuals and has so much potential, and yet autistic voices are so rarely seen within our leadership. And then also because of my own experiences navigating the dissonance of my identity as an autistic woman and my vocation as a BCBA. Yep.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And it's been, a sentiment I've heard shared by many other autistic and neurodivergent BCBAs as well. It can be a difficult field to work in as one, and we'll definitely talk about that later, but, also very glad you're here. And it's actually funny, if I remember right, Ayo and Grant and I met you at a panel we did at UW a couple years ago. It's very serendipitous. Like, you seem to be the only one in the audience who, had heard like the autistic perspective of ABA before. And yeah, here you are now. So awesome. Grant, you want to share a little about yourself next?
To be helpful.
Cool.
This panel.
Sorry. All right, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I am Grant Blasco. I'm 19 and an autistic AAC user. Right now, I am a running start student planning to apply to 4-year universities. I am also a University of Washington Dwight Scholar and active member of TASH's National Communication Access Work Group, and an advisory council member of the civil rights organization, Communication First. Since the age of 11, I have been advocating for myself and other non-speaking autistics at schools, conferences, and universities throughout the United States. I am passionate about curriculum accessibility, universal design for learning, and inclusive practices. I have served as a stakeholder on panels guiding autism professionals at the American Occupational Therapy Association and CAST. Currently, I am co-designing course for classroom support considerations for AAC users at New York University's Program for Inclusion and Neurodiversity Education, PINE. In 2021, I completed the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network's Autistic Campus Inclusion Leadership Academy. Lastly, I am deeply motivated by the opportunity to stand up for the systemic change needed to improve the lives and education of disabled individuals, especially those impacted by communication challenges. Why did I decide to participate in this panel? Well, in 2019, I presented my story to University of Washington Special Education, ABA, and psychology students with a panel of other autistic adult advocates. I was terrified to enter this environment, but it turned out to be a great crowd. It was interesting too, because I was the only autistic panelist who had been diagnosed as a young child, so I was the only one who had what we would term early intervention. I have used so many therapies that it is hard to remember all of them. I started with speech therapy, ABA, and ear/fluoride at age 2. I had an entire team of in-home ABA therapists for 15 to 30 hours per week from age 2 to 8. I also went to school-based early intervention programs, switched to an inclusion preschool with an ABA shadow, and then made my way to a small private school for autism until age 10. So much of my early life was spent in ABA therapy. I wanted to mention all of this because it has taken me years to come to terms with the treatments that were meant to be helpful. This panel and others like it give me an opportunity to share my lived experience, and I hope it helps to evolve supports for others.
Awesome. Thank you, Grant. You've always been someone I have learned so much from, and I'm so grateful you're here. Yeah, so before we jump to the next question, I know it is a unconventional choice to have two autistic BCBAs in a panel about the autistic perception of ABA. Oftentimes, the folks having these conversations don't necessarily realize that there are already autistic people working in the field, whether or not they know it. And it makes me think of, it's something in social work we call a single story, or sort of like a stereotype. There's when folks in the field think of autistic people, they almost always think of them as clients, not necessarily as peers or coworkers. And that impacts how they see us and how they do their work. And, stereotypes and single stories also, impact the conversations around ABA, both in how the people having the conversations are perceived, like whether it be autistic people being, represented, seen as, angry or like aggressive or not understanding science, or, parents being represented as not caring about their children or not understanding, their children's needs. These stereotypes often really miss the nuance, around ABA, around these conversations. And one of the reasons why we're doing this panel is to really start to dive into this nuance. And before also we jump to the next question, I also wanted to say, wanted to name that there is, for autistic people, in these conversations in this field, there is a lot of pressure on us to perform or act in a certain way, to interact in a certain way, to share our stories in a certain way. And we might face, social sanctions or, pressure, or in a lot of cases like oppression, if we don't fit into this certain box. And I think one of the reasons why we're doing this panel is to really start to break out of that box. So yeah, I felt like it was a dynamic that needed to be named. So, thinking about that, let's jump into the first question. So, when examining the philosophies behind ABA and the autism treatment systems, compared with the philosophies and ideas that exist within the autistic advocacy community, how do they impact the conversation around ABA and how it's seen and perceived? These philosophies impact everything from, what does a successful therapy look like? What does the best outcome look like? What does a good life look like? And so how do these philosophies impact how ABA is seen by the different stakeholders? How are they impacting the conversation today? Awen, you want to go first again?
I'm happy to do so. I think something that struck me particularly when I was in school is the ways in which our ethics code is nothing like the ethics codes of those who support disability activists. I see a really big difference in the ABA community around expecting an autistic to be independent, like as independent as possible, and also a productive member of society. We can take the productive member of society and kind of like pin that on capitalism a little bit. That is part of our cultural expectation. But the autistic community is not looking necessarily for that. And I think this really impacts delivery because parents and providers are looking to teach behaviors that are indistinguishable from their normal friends. And if that quote sounds familiar, it should be for the BCBAs in the room because it's from Lovas in the infamous paper where in 87, the behavioral treatment of normal education and intellectual functioning in young autistic children, where he allegedly cured children of autism. And this paper haunts our field. And I'm going to say haunts because it impacts the number of hours that are recommended per week. It is pretty heavily entrenched in the work that we do. And this doesn't necessarily benefit the autistic community. but very likely benefits the neurotypical community. It's more benefiting and slanted towards looking normal rather than contacting reinforcement, living a rich and fulfilling life. And that's the system of oppression that the autistic community is concerned about, because it's allistic, it's ableist, and it's baked right into the foundation of the way we interact with our clients. It's not possible for us to grow up with this training to practice these habits and not have them some way enmeshed in our treatment plans. And I think what's interesting is we don't expect this kind of behavior from other members of the disability community. We don't expect people in wheelchairs to be completely independent all the time. And there are plenty of people who use wheelchairs that can walk, but they choose not to for any number of reasons, such as difficulty with walking, time with walking, the pain of walking, or just it's tiring and they don't want to do that when they could use their wheelchair and have more energy for other things that are beneficial to them. And I think that this framework really does rest on the people providing the treatment, and it is a collaborative process between parents and providers that I think we all instinctively know, but gets forgotten. My general goal as a provider is to think of behavioral cusps, what's going to actually get my client into settings around stimuli that are more reinforcing for them. And that's what socially significant behaviors means if we're thinking of the dimensions of ABA. And I think that it just has to be a really intentional conversation. And I think oftentimes it's really easy to get stuck in, this is the treatment that I've done for other people, without looking at whether or not it's beneficial for the client.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. You know, it's oftentimes in the field I've noticed that, you know, the needs of the autistic child are thought of as being the same as the needs of the family. And that's not always, you know, the case. And, you know, since oftentimes the autistic child or the disabled child, you know, is the one with the least power in that situation, where, you know, others are making, you know, treatment decisions, you know, decisions about how they can live their life. Oftentimes they end up, you know, getting the short end of the stick in so many ways. And that's not necessarily something I've seen really acknowledged or talked about very often. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you. Alex, what do you think?
I think that many of the conversations that I've had with other autistics about their concerns related to ABA are about autonomy, about self-advocacy, and about coercion, and how within the foundations of operant conditioning, the way that it is taught and most often practiced, there is an element of coercion to it, because you're adding that additional piece of reinforcement, which can be naturally attained within the environment. But when you bring in those extrinsic or artificial reinforcers, edibles, I'm looking at you, then there is that element of, and parents point it out all the time, where it's, you're bribing my child to behave in a certain way. And so by making those decisions, by artificially reinforcing the desired behaviors that we want to see, rather than focusing on creating those moments of autonomy and creating those moments for self-advocacy, and really reinforcing the language and the communication involved with, this is how I need to navigate my environment, this is what I need, and focusing more so on decreasing what could be seen as maladaptive or challenging behaviors, which are just means of communication. It's just a different form of communication. If you think about things that are so often used in ABA, such as the prompting hierarchy, and the fact that so many goals will start with most to least prompting, especially in early intervention, then, I mean, if someone was taking my hand and making my hand do things that I didn't want to do, I would probably be aggressive too. So it is that lack of autonomy while teaching independence that is such a huge concern. And I think that there has been a lot of growth within the field of ABA just in the 5 years that I've been concentrated in working in the field, to create more opportunities for autonomy and more opportunities for self-advocacy, and a push in that direction, especially in the Seattle area. However, in a number of early intervention programs and 2040 models where it's, if you're over the age of 5, it's 20 hours a week. If you're under the age of 5, it's 40 hours a week. Those still exist. And while those still exist, there can't be good ABA. We are responsible for all BCBAs. In order to be able to ethically maintain our field, we have to take responsibility for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and work together to create the further reform and things like that. So I think that just having these conversations and increasing the voices of the stakeholders, really elevating those autistic voices in every aspect of decision making within ABA, not just the client within their treatment plan, but within how money gets spent and so on and so forth. Having those is so, it's huge, and it's just the first step.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, one thing your answer was making me think of, and Eowyn was kind of touching on this, you know, when the services are being received and, you know, when the goals are being done, what independence is thought of is existing in the world in a non-autistic, non-disabled way, no matter the impact that has on the autistic child. And in so many, you know, circumstances, like the autistic child is taught to hide their discomfort, usually for the benefit of those around them, you know, assuming that it's also for the benefit of that autistic child. And, you know, one thing I've realized is that since, you know, there aren't very many of us working with autistic children, like the providers don't understand just how exhausting that is for us. And, you know, the negative mental health impacts it has on us after, you know, doing it for, you know, 20, 30, 40 years. I think, you know, the science shows it's one of the biggest reasons why, you know, the suicide rate is so high in the community and why anxiety and depression is so high. So yeah, I'm glad you two, you know, brought that up. Grant, I know you're going to have a lot of really important things to say here, and I can't wait to hear them.
I am painfully aware of the difference in philosophies and feel threatened every day by the tension between the two. Conversations like this need to happen so that autistics can feel safer in more environments. I am grateful to my other panel members for focusing on the professional aspects of this discussion, and I plan to share my experience where relevant. The framing of autism as a deficit model definitely impacted my early life. I was not born with the same neurology as a typical person, and my experiences of toxic stress from trying to mimic typical behavior left me with PTSD responses to everyday exposures most people don't even notice. Over a long journey, I have done a lot of work to figure out compensatory strategies so that I can participate in life to the best of my ability, and I expect that I will continue to improve, but only if the supports I need are available, and that includes a better understanding from professionals of what constitutes trauma and re-traumatization. I think I want to thank Eowyn and Alex, and add the shame is a devastating demotivator.
I think that right there, Grant, is, I think, one of the most, you know, like biggest and most important things that, you know, all folks who work with autistic people need to know. Like, shame is such a prevalent force in our lives. Like, we're shamed for flapping, we're shamed for not making eye contact, and like that, like we carry that around us when we have such strong memories. It's and it's so easy to like reactive, you know, like create traumatic memories around that, and, you know, be reminded of that in so many ways, and it just impacts how we carry ourselves in the world. So yeah, so glad you brought that up. Eowyn or Alex, while Grant's typing up his next thought, do y'all have anything you want to add to, you know, the topic of shame and how it impacts autistic children or ABA?
Thanks, Ewan. I don't want to steal Grant's thunder. One thing, in 2019, when the three of you as a panel came to speak to my class, and I mean, I could fangirl by being on this panel in and of itself, but one thing that Grant said that has forever stayed with me is that piece about shame and the piece about how the clients receiving ABA services are abundantly aware of the provider's feelings and expectations and wanting the correct answer. And that level of pressure to get the answer right or to do what is wanted or expected has to weigh so heavy. I feel it navigating the world on my own when I, speak out of turn in a meeting and things like that, and then get pulled aside afterwards. I can only imagine that it's a similar feeling, and it's crushing. And to have that for, 10, 15, 20 hours a week as part of your learning experience. Yeah. PTSD, that makes sense to me. Because it is a high level of trauma and performance-based expectations that are set on you by people that you may not be able to fully communicate with, or people who aren't listening to you, because they are the experts, or I'm going to just throw myself in there. We are the experts, and we are creating the treatment plans, and therefore that's how the decisions get made. But really thinking about that from an empathic standpoint and reflecting on my own experiences has truly, truly shaped my practice and the work that I do both in advocacy and within my work in ABA. And listening to Grant describe his experiences was hugely influential on that. Thanks, Grant.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to add that, interacting with Grant is always such a joy, but I also want to speak to Alex's comment as well, because there is this idea that that somehow we also as practitioners are always going to do the right thing. I know that in technicality, when I was trained to always frame things in a positive way. And I just want to share that doesn't always happen. And I'm sorry, I'm also human, and that doesn't always happen all the time. But the difference is that it can cause real harm. And I really appreciate Alex pointing out that we have to be accountable for that kind of behavior, because we are the ones perpetrating it and we are the ones responsible. It's the same as it is with any kind of ism. The people holding the power are the people responsible for creating change. White people are responsible for racism. Able-bodied people are responsible for ableism. And the neurotypical people are responsible for the way that they interact with the neurodiverse population. And that's an unfortunate truth. That's really painful to reflect on our own experiences. Even me as an autistic provider, I have to look back at things that I was trained and I was reinforced by, and they were terrible. I almost swore. They were not okay. And I can't go back, and I can't change that interaction for that child. And it's not going to change if nobody takes responsibility for the fact that it happened at all. And oftentimes when I hear this discussion among other providers, it's a little bit like that meme, like, I'm not sure we're really the bad guys. Are we the bad guys? I don't think we're the bad guys. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if we think that we are. It's our job to change our behavior. Behavior plans are not for the children. They're for the provider.
I could definitely agree with that. Grant, looks like you
This is a thing.
Ready.
I am hunting for a path to success and just needs. This is a thing. I am hunting for a path to success and just need support.
Definitely, yeah. And it seems like all autistic people, whether or not we're able to speak with our mouth parts, have a desire to succeed. We have goals, we have dreams, we have hopes, and that's not acknowledged or realized, especially for, the non-speakers. So we'll talk about that a lot later on in the panel, but I'm glad you brought that up there, Grant. Thank you. So we're going to jump to our next question, which is, about the autistic perception of ABA. So while autistic people might have their disagreements with one another. We're very good at arguing with one another. It's definitely true in so many ways. It is fair to say that, like, one of the things most autistic people agree on, based on like the data that's out there and based on the conversations I see, the vast majority of autistic people who have heard of ABA have some concerns, to put it mildly. I've heard pushback from a lot of behaviorists and folks in the field that autistic people just don't really understand ABA or the science behind it. Another pushback I often get is that it's just a few poorly trained BCBAs, like usually from online schools, or RBTs who are making the mistakes and creating all of the bad things about the field. Another really common thing I hear is that, like, all of the harm was done in the past. Things are getting better. Things are much better now, and that our concerns as autistic people are overblown. So, I'm going to ask y'all, as BCBAs, and Grant as someone who still sees ABA quite often and has experienced it yourself, do you think the autistic community's concern about ABA is valid? Are there still reasons to be concerned, like even today? We can awkwardly stare at each other until someone starts speaking. I'm fine with that.
I'm ready for this one. I'll jump in. And actually, Aowen's last comment was a good segue to what I have in mind to say. Specific to this, anytime a less marginalized group controls the services and supports that are primary and best funded for a more marginalized group, in this case, disabled portion of the population, there is room and need for concern. When it is taken a step further and large amounts of money are made by the less marginalized group for their work supporting the more marginalized, or in this case, disabled group, with little to no input from that marginalized group, then there is cause for alarm. I think that we have to listen to those autistic voices, and neurotypical people cannot even fully comprehend what a day in the life of a neurodivergent individual is like. There's a lot of factors that you can think about and sort of play with in hypotheticals, but it's different. And I can't imagine what a day in the life of Zach is like, or Aowen or Grant, because I only know the experience of Alex. And even that is confusing to me sometimes. So if there are concerns about abuse, if there are a few people, or if it were RBTs, then the fact that the system is set up to use RBTs who are minimally trained, and yet they are the ones providing the direct service, all of these things are valid. BCBAs, if they are licensed, then they went through an accredited program. So if the accreditation process isn't catching the issues that are involved with the training, then yeah, there's still work to be done, and we are still accountable for all of us, even those of us who didn't go to online programs, or even those of us who provide services more directly and rely less on RBTs. The fact that the system that we work within exists the way that it does means that we have to elevate those voices. We have to support the people from the more marginalized identity that are being most highly impacted. It's an ableist structure. It is a neurotypical system that was created to support and create more independent neurodivergent folks. However, it is not, very little is known about what we neurodivergent folks want. Like independence in, I'm going to quote Grant again, really, I'm sorry that I'm fangirling. But independence and comfort you don't have to choose independence over comfort. It goes back to what Aowen was saying about wheelchair users. just because we exist within the world and may not be independent to the level that neurotypical individuals would expect us to be or hope that we are, doesn't make our experiences any less valuable, does not mean that we are any less important within the world. It just means that we experience things differently. And we may not want that level of independence if it comes at the cost of our quality of life.
Zach, you're muted.
I'm wondering if he's responding to the question in the chat box.
We're having technical difficulties. That one. Okay, I'll jump in.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm also happy to just take the lead from here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sure that Zach has other enlightening things to say as we segue from person to person. And I'm happy to also address the RBT question a little bit.
Please do.
A little preemptively. I think that's great, David. If there are people who are extremely talented and extremely well trained, that is just fantastic. And I'm for that. And I'm not saying that they're not. However, and I also will say that obviously here in Washington, we have a pretty extensive legislation around the training of people who work in the field. That being said, I've worked in the field, I supervise people, and oftentimes I've been there 80% of sessions, and I still struggle to train an RBT with the idea that the child is getting non-contingent reinforcement, which means you just give it to them. That's what it means by definition. If it's non-contingent, you give it to them. If it's contingent and they've earned it, you give it to them. You don't hope they forget. You don't, oh no, it's time to go, maybe tomorrow. And I've seen it. And for those who are saying things like, well, that's over and that's in the past, I have only been BCBA for a short number of years. And I've been working in the field recently for the last 10 years. So clearly it's not in the past, because it is in my lived experience of watching both my own training and watching the training of others, and also having to fire people because they are not providing the things that I've asked them to do, even though they've gone through the various trainings. I think if we're looking at the question of, do autistics have a reason to be concerned? Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those who say they don't understand ABA, okay, then teach them. Put it in normal terms. I get edible reinforcement to myself on a regular basis, because if I've been a very good girl and done all my work, I might have an extra cup of coffee. And I think explaining it in these terms that make sense, or even I see a lot of people who are really concerned about DTT. And I think the way they've been shown DTT on a video looks like animal training, and that makes humans very uncomfortable. We don't like the idea that we are the same as animals. We want to be smarter and better, and we have whole civilizations.
Can you clarify what DTT is?
Discrete trial training.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who aren't familiar, it's where you take a task and you break it down into teeny tiny parts, and you train one part at a time. And that sounds really fantastic for all of us. But the way often it's presented as you're teaching the color red, and so you put the red out and you make a kid touch red, and the bare basics of that, when they're scaffolded down very, very small, look really concerning for people who aren't familiar with that, and also should be faded from the small to a large. Essentially, it just means I presented an opportunity to let you do a thing, and if you did the right thing, we're gonna celebrate. And if you didn't do the right thing, I'm going to go back and I'm going to help you do the right thing. And there's a lot to be said about the right thing. But ultimately, I think anybody who's looking at this conversation and saying hashtag not all ABA, I think can probably extrapolate what I'm getting at just from that idea of, if we're looking at the argument and saying, well, it's not everybody doing that, you're immediately silencing the person who's saying I was harmed. And unfortunately, we do have a whole host of people that we taught skills to advocate, and they're advocating now. And if we don't like what they have to say, then it's up to us to alter our behavior for the next time we're teaching somebody else. We're all teachable. That's what I love about this field, is it assumes we can all learn. And I think we can learn to be better practitioners. Don't think it's a big ask.
Awesome. Can you all hear me now? Cool. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Zoom was like not letting me click buttons, like unmute myself or, type in chat. But I'm back now.
As the person who is about to have to step in for you, I am so relieved that you are back.
I'm glad to be back as well. Yeah, and thank you, Eowyn. Like, I wish we had longer for this panel. There was a lot of really important things to unpack there. And I guess before we do that, Grant, I want to see if you have anything you want to add to this, because I know you have a lot to add to this.
Okay, he has what he wrote, and then he started something else, but he's not that far into it.
Okay.
The autistic concerns about ABA are definitely valid, and I want to bring home the idea with my other panel members that we have a long way to go to reform the messaging about what autistic people need. I would say that my therapist ranged in their ability to connect with me, and if I were to factor that in, I always did better when the energy was positive, very much thinking that it is the relationship that matters most. The truth is, I needed a way to show my competence. If I felt incompetent and the person next to me did not seem to notice or care other than to write down the data, then it was very likely that I would spiral into despair inside and my efforts would decrease because there seemed to be no win situation going on. I would think about my life silently for a while, sometimes for hours or even days. Then at some point a trigger would let loose all the feelings of frustration that I had been marinating together to get a good handle on what to do. I want to speak to the parents of kids who tinge the water with the idea that they are far different from the very independent adults who are often able to object the loudest. I thank goodness that my parents followed the path to hear from autistic mentors. I am what is considered a high needs autistic, and by that I mean that I can be vulnerable to profound disrespect if I don't have an ally present in most settings. If they did not see what is possible by hearing directly from the autistic community, then I may have continued to be judged as cognitively disabled, and my education and life experiences would have been far different. I want to say that I am feeling aware that I am seen as different from others, but I would be willing to talk about how autism still challenges me after all these years.
Awesome. So while Grant is typing up the rest of that, we had a question earlier sort of centered around, how do we know how well, RBTs are actually being trained? Do y'all have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yes. So RBT being registered behavior technician, the only two requirements are 40 hours worth of training, which is 1 work week for most of us, as well as passing a standardized test. And so I definitely would not go so far as to say, in my opinion, that that is extensive training. Here in the state of Washington, beyond that, the legislation simply states that individuals have to have 40 hours worth of training and a certain percentage, which I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's between 5 and 10% of their sessions supervised. So if a client is receiving 40 hours per week of services, then the BCBA or supervisor is present for 4 of those hours. And the RBT who has had 1 week worth of training is doing the rest of it. And so we BCBAs are responsible for all of that in a three, sometimes 4, because sometimes it's grad students who are doing the supervision tiered system. And the thing about RBTs is that, yes, it means that services are provided to a larger number of people. Great, in theory. It also means that the companies that are providing those ABA services are making a lot more money because the BCBAs can manage more cases that way, and therefore billing is more increased. That's my very pessimistic view. As someone who works within the field and who has experience working within corporate ABA for large nationwide corporations who will, in the state of Washington, the other only requirement is a high school diploma. So I have sat in meetings where people have said things like, you know, we need people. So we're gonna take what we have, take what we can get. And anytime those conversations are happening, there is a problem, and the rest of us need to step up to help mitigate that problem. It is on all of us. It's not just, you know, a one bad egg, hashtag not all ABA kind of a thing. If it's happening anywhere, then we need to be saying something and doing something about it. And I think that having been in RBT for several years, my heart was always in the right place. Did I know what I was doing a good portion of the time? No. And I have no qualms about admitting that. And I view a lot of my further career as reparations for things that I did as an RBT because I did not know better.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, and it also, like, I know there's a supervision requirement as well. You were saying it was like 5% of, yeah, an RBT's time.
I'm hoping somebody in the chat box pipes in about this, but I'm pretty sure it's 5% of the month for the RBT, and it's not specific to that case.
Okay.
And hopefully somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I was looking at this recently because my group, my company does a lot of social groups, and these technically qualifiers are supervision as well, because we're there at RBTs, supervising them for hours. 5% per month total, thank you. So it is in fact not per case, it's just out of the month of accrued time, you have seen this RBT for 5% of their hours, which isn't specific to that case. It's just that human. So if you see them treating one client extremely well, and they just really don't get along with the other client, you might not see that.
Yeah, and it's so hard to know what's actually going on with only 5% of the time being supervised, even if that's being done as well. I know many folks who worked as RBTs, and a lot of what they said was like, even if they were getting supervised in theory, like it often didn't actually happen, and that they often like felt left alone, that they didn't have, you know, they couldn't ask questions, they couldn't get clarifications on things, and they just had to follow, you know, a written plan, and they didn't feel competent enough to be able to do that, similar to what you were saying, Alex. I know it's not always that case, but you know, that's the story I've heard more often than not, though. So it's something that's concerning.
And it's something that literally has kept me up at night, is that with the size of the caseloads that I have been given, I am responsible for supervising and making sure that my RBTs feel competent with following the plans that I've created. But I don't necessarily have the time to be able to see all of them, you know, sleep, eat, and function, especially as someone with high levels of executive dysfunction. It is, and I know that we'll get there, but it's part of that onus is on the BCBAs. Part of that is on clinical directors who are assigning caseloads. Part of that is on the companies who are giving metrics to those clinical directors based on what the sizes of those caseloads need to be. Like, this is you want to talk about how the sausage is made.
You ready?
Okay, Grant, looks like you're ready.
I think I want to say also that I can quickly see that individuals may be getting the idea that I am anti-ABA, but I actually think chaining and task breakdown is how I do all of my compensatory strategies.
Totally. Yeah, and you know what, Grant, with what you were saying earlier, just you know, having to go through so many drills. Like, I have read so many you know, articles and stories by autistic people who have, you know, apraxia, where they're not necessarily able to you know, control their bodies in a way that they intend to, and that they have to just, you know, they're expected to try and point at a, you know, red card or a blue card, for example. And, you know, even if they want to point to, you know, the card they're being asked to point to, they can't, because their body won't let them. And it just really, you know, sort of produces that shame. that we were talking about earlier. So yeah.
And I didn't even really start diving into a more well-rounded understanding of the related things to autism, like dyspraxia, until I was diagnosed with autism myself. It's not something that's covered in ABA programs, at least not in the program that I went through, which is a huge detriment, because then it's not on our radar when we are doing things like, here's a field of 3, pick the correct color based on what someone is saying, like receptive and expressive communication, when the person doesn't necessarily have the same motor control. It may look like they do, but there's no accounting for what the neurology within is doing. And that is so important when you are working within a field that doesn't always presume competence.
Totally. Yeah. So we have a question in the audience. Where do you get a diagnosis of apraxia? I don't actually know that. I'm guessing it would either be a neurologist or a physical therapist. But you would probably want to start, by asking your primary care provider and going from there. But it is definitely something that I think impacts autistic folks a lot more than is understood in the field right now. And it leads, someone said an SLP in the audience. So an SLP could, I think it leads to circumstances where autistic folks are assumed to not necessarily know what's going on around them, or to have that they have a cognitive disability, when they just can't control their body enough to be able to, communicate in a way that folks around them will understand, other than maybe like meltdowns or quote unquote behaviors. Yeah. So, jumping to, the next question, and we've talked about this a lot, but I wanted to see if there's anything more, to say on this, like what really needs to happen for, the harm that's being done to stop, what are the specific steps that the ABA field needs to take? Like, what do autistic people need to do, and like where's the onus?
I'm happy to take this one first, Alex, unless you're ready. I think number one, believe people with autism. This is something that I've learned in my anti-racist work. Just believe people who are expressing that they have been harmed. And then I'm going to kind of speak to the practitioners in the room a little bit more first, and then I'll come back to the autistic community as well, of like things that we as autistic humans can do. So first, I do want to, I saw somebody in the chat box kind of mentioning like queer conversion therapy, and yes, like the Lovas, the same person that I was speaking to earlier, as I was kind of alluding to, did in fact collaborate for the Feminine Boy Project in the 70s. And some of the most horrifying papers that I have ever read were listening to individuals who presented as seductive, feminine 4-year-olds were untrained from that behavior. And it was considered successful. And Lovas then went on to collaborate with a variety of other people who work in gay conversion therapy. And if this is somebody that we, as I was mentioning earlier, have heavily relied upon for guidance in our field, there's no way that's not still present in our training. If that's the person that we are looking to for the recommendations of 40 hours, if that's the person that we are trained about as far as extremely effective ABA, if those are the videos that are being modeled to us, AKA video modeling, then those are going to be intrinsic in our behaviors as far as what we are doing. And they are getting reinforced because we, the providers, are providing this service. It is successful, and therefore we continue providing the service. That's how reinforcement works. I do also, scaling it back a little bit, I do also wish that we as a field had more training about what autism looks like. I know this seems like a silly ask, but things like hyperlexia, things like apraxia, things like, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there is actually a word for when individuals are incapable of identifying their internal feelings, which is a trademark symptom.
Alexithymia.
Thank you. A trademark symptom of having autism. These are all things that I did not know about I didn't learn about as a BCBA. I learned about them through therapy, having like a therapist who was like, do you know this word? It's very important. And I've now learned when something happens as an autistic individual, someone says, how do you feel? And I can actually just say, I don't know. Give me a week. Alexithmia is the word, Kaylee. And so I would like to see more training around how the things that we do know about autism, rather than we don't know how it happened. Like, I don't care how it happened. I want to know how it presents. Just to think of modifications. I also want to look at ABA and think about NET, like natural environment training is A, really fun, B, provides natural reinforcement, and C, is super effective. I'm a big fan of that in pretty much all of my work. I think other big tools on my belt, I know Alex was kind of giving some strong eye contact to the idea of edible reinforcement. I'm a big fan of token economies. I think these are super simple and easy and effective to implement. And I think I like the way that I've implemented them, and I feel really clever about it. I actually just pay my kids for their work because I get paid for my work. They have bank accounts. We put their money in a bank account and they cash out for things that are of value to them. Doesn't matter if it's riding on a skateboard for 2 minutes. Doesn't matter if it's spitting in the sink. I don't care what makes them happy. They can pay for it with all of their free time. And then we have spit contests. I really want to see us moving away from ideas like big deals and little deals. I think this is a really easy change that we could provide. If my friend said to me that they were having a really bad day and I said, well, is that a big deal or a little deal? That would be extremely rude and offensive. And even I know that. Instead, I often frame things as like, is this something that you can fix by yourself? Is this something you need help with? Or if it's something that's not fixable. And rather than looking at it like your reaction is too wrong, we don't know that. Maybe they have a long history of punishment procedures, aversive stimuli, any number of things. Like, the feeling is valid, and sometimes all our kids just want is to somebody sit there and go, I'm really sorry. That does suck. We don't have to give it a ton of attention for those who are really concerned about like attention maintained behaviors. That's a different topic that we could talk about on a different day. But just acknowledging, like, yeah, I'm really sorry. Like, what are we going to do about it? This seems to be the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or maybe just the worst thing today. I think we have a big role to play in that, and I think it's doable. I think those are all easy changes. The other thing I think about when I'm looking at the autistic community is the people who are really concerned. I think that's reasonable because no one's explained it to you. And like, we can ask those questions. We can do that research. And if you don't want to do the research, you can just ask somebody who's in your house providing that. Like, what are you doing and why? You deserve to know that. And the autistic community also gets to make informed consent choices. I do see people get really anxious about things, and I sometimes have to kind of step back and reflect about like, well, what do neurotypical people do? Do neurotypical people like take vacation time because they've worked really hard and their vacation's directly related to that? Then we can provide that for our community too. It just, the words are different. It is a science that does have a lot of training. We have our own special jargon, and it sounds really intimidating. And I think that's partly by design. And so I think rather than hearing the words or like seeing the thing, asking questions is a really important part of ours. And also advocating of like, yeah, I like don't like this, and that's okay. Like, it's not, if you don't like this, there's a bunch of different modalities available out there. They're not all paid for, they're not all easy to find. And that's okay too, because it's informed consent.
Awesome. Thank you, Awen. Alex, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I do. For practitioners, listen to autistics. We need a whole group of autistics as part of the BACB that are reviewing everything that happens, all of the expectations that we need to have. These decisions shouldn't be made without consulting autistics. The other thing that we as practitioners need to do is push for more legislation, push back against insurance companies that are creating the systems that make it so that it's hard for BCBAs to support RBTs in a more meaningful way, that make it so that we have RBTs rather than BCBAs doing the direct consulting and work ourselves. And pushing back against people who are making money off of ABA and prescribing hours that that may not be clinically significant, putting myself out there. But speaking that truth to power, if you, it's as minimal as like nothing about us without us, but also if you see something, say something, not just reporting it to the BACB, but shouting out insurance issues that happen, lobbying within your local governments or state governments or the national government so that these things are changed. We are the best funded support and therapy for autistic individuals. We have the most access, which means that we are also the most accountable. And as far as autistics go, and this is not, it's not something that anybody can ask of us, but it's really the only thing. I'm gonna quote the Chris Gethard show. It's a special interest. Keep shouting till they're listening. You just got to keep yelling and find those of us who are listening, and we'll shout too. Find those of us who, there aren't many of us, but find those of us who are autistic, and, you know, let us be in your corner. Let us elevate your voices and get more involved. And I know that it's exhausting and I know that it's disheartening, but you just got to keep shouting until they're listening, because it's all about the creating that change for the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Still having tech problems. Sorry about that, everyone. I didn't quite catch the last things you said there, but I'm sure whatever it was great. Grant, what are you thinking on this?
The ABA field is listening, and it is a great start. I think there are many people who are starting to understand. Once there is a better understanding of what constitutes trauma and causes PTSD, it should be incorporated into the ethical guidelines of all who work with disabled people. I also think the field can be dangerous if we are guessing what the reasons for behaviors are rather than looking for objective data. For the last 2 years, I have presented to Tasha about how I use my Fitbit data to train my ABE team to look for my stress levels and incorporate it into the way my accommodations are implemented. For instance, if my heart rate is 130, I am not responding because I can't, not because I don't know the answer. This groundbreaking idea of true objective data to inform support needs is a great potential to help.
Awesome. Yeah. Grant, I definitely agree with you there. I've been thinking about the data itself, actually. You know, it's often assumed to be objective, you know, the last word, and, you know, that you can measure everything that's going on with it. And I feel like that's not always the case. You know, there are power dynamics in what data is seen as valid, how that data is actually collected, how that data is interpreted. And that last part especially, I think, is really a really big deal when, you know, you have non-autistic observers trying to understand autistic behavior without actually really being able to empathize or understand the same experiences we've had, or understand why we're doing the things we do in, you know, that specific given situation. And, you know, I think that goes back to sort of what we were saying earlier about representation, you know, just the fact that, you know, autistic people aren't really in the field very much, or it's not seen as a priority for us to be working with autistic children or parents of autistic children. It just means that so much gets missed, and what, you know, parents are being educated on about autism may not necessarily be true or necessarily accurate. You know, the other big thing that I really think needs to be looked at is, also the research itself. There are a lot, like ABA has a big research base, a lot of single subject designs, and, really, I'm going to call it a bombastic study, came out a month or two ago that showed like there's a very high rate of undisclosed conflicts of interest, both within ABA literature and autism literature itself. I think it was as high as like 83% in ABA literature. And, it also showed that, the studies which didn't report a conflict of interest and also had a conflict of interest reported like essentially a greater impact than studies without a conflict of interest. And so, tying back to what you were saying earlier, Alex, like you definitely have to look at, the financial interests, like do you gain financially if a study makes a certain finding. We know also from research that like there's still an impact like on this, whether or not it's conscious. Like I don't think people are like purposefully messing with the data, but they're just more likely to interpret things in a favorable way, that benefits their worldview or, benefits them ultimately. And I know this is a big problem with like scientific literature itself, but I think it has a huge impact on the lives of autistic children. And I think, access to high quality research is like absolutely a social justice concern. And it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, especially, I especially think there needs to be like more longitudinal studies, studies that look more than just like the impact after, 1 year or 2 years on autistic children, because the assumption right now seems to be like, if you measure at a certain point, on an IQ scale, if you're getting certain grades, then things are going to work out, for you as an adult. You can be independent. And, I know from my community organizing work, like I interact with hundreds of autistic folks a month, like not exaggerating there. I've seen many folks with master's degrees, with doctorates who aren't able to get jobs. And, with the way the system is right now, it's very tied up in the medical model of disabilities. It says that the problem is the autistic person, the fact that we can't socialize in a certain way or we can't assimilate in the workplace. It ignores the discrimination we encounter, the inaccessible barriers. And, right now, I feel like the burden is put on autistic people rather than the systems and environments around us. Like that, there also needs to be a lot of adaptations there in order to really, benefit us. So, yeah, there's so much, so much more I want to say on that, but I also know we're running a little short on time. So we'll jump to the next question, which is for Alex and Eowyn. The experiences of autistic BCBAs are not often one that's talked about. What has it actually been like working in the field for the two of you? Like, have you noticed a difference, if you disclose you're autistic versus if you don't disclose you're autistic? And are there certain barriers to autistic BCBAs working in the field, or autistic RBTs, or, just autistic people in general working in the field that folks don't necessarily realize exist? Big questions there, I know.
I'm going for it, Eowyn. It's ridiculously hard. It is such a high level of cognitive dissonance day in and day out all the time. I am still navigating, when do I disclose? Do I disclose? Is it safe to disclose? These people don't want me to disclose to these particular families. I have a whole different set of issues with unpacking that. It's a whole thing, and it doesn't need to be. The other thing, to echo what Zach was just saying, is that any and all accommodations that I have needed, I have had to come up with. Being a BCBA is not a career path, especially with the way the expectations are right now, that is palatable, let alone feasible for many autistics. I have high levels of executive dysfunction, but I also, have a ridiculously weird brain and memory that makes it so that I can remember things. But transitioning from session to session, with the only transition time that I have in between being time in my car, driving from one to the next, is extremely difficult. The fact that on a daily basis during a supervision session, I am expected to interact with the client, interact with the BT, review all of the data, update and or write all new programs, and check in with parents, all pretty much simultaneously. I can barely do one thing at a time most of the time. So then I fall behind and I end up working 70 plus hours per week and end up completely burnt out because I can't keep up. And I don't know how to ask for the accommodations that I need, which is so messed up because I work in a field that is all about helping to advocate for and supporting people who need accommodations. And yet accommodations for myself have been incredibly hard to find. I also, just by being me and my communication style, have experienced a lot of conflict at work and have ultimately had to job hop to a certain degree because I'm not welcome in certain places because of the way that I communicate, but I just communicate differently. And I don't always understand the way that things that I say come off. And so being a BCBA and staying a BCBA is extremely difficult, but I keep fighting because I know that my voice as an autistic and someone who is involved with the autistic community is super important. And if I'm not yelling and jumping up and down about it, that's one less person that's yelling and jumping up and down about it. And my experience isn't going to change if I just give up.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. There needs to be activism within the field of ABA and outside of the field as well to really produce the changes that are needed. And also, just as a really small vignette, I once heard about a certain, student over at the local ABA school who was known for, standing on top of tables and yelling about social justice concerns. I was never specifically told who it was, but I wonder who it might be. Eowyn, what about you?
I actually had a wonderful friend opportunity with Alex, and we talked about our wildly different experiences. And I'm going to go ahead and shout out somebody who may or may not be in the chat box, but I work at a company that is extremely supportive. I work at a company that is less than 15 people. I, for reasons unknown to me, often am in a position of power. I have a lot of flexibility, and I'm super, super supported. And that is the main reason why I work at this small company, is because that was true at a different company that I worked at where this person was a mentor and I got, honestly at this point a friend. And supports include sending emails to say, is this nice enough to send to a parent? Because I have created a lot of data and it's a really good argument about why I think we should blank. And then he says, this could be phrased differently, or why don't you first set up this part of the conversation, and then if they ask questions, add more to it. I have a really limited stamina for work hours, and my schedule's been, especially in the pandemic, mostly accommodated, especially because I am also in a position of management. So I only have so much stamina in a day to either be the direct provider, the supervisor, or the manager. And those are 3 hats, which are 3 jobs. And our company has really intense interactions with our clients. I know we talked much earlier in the panel about the 5% rule, and thank you, Dio. My company has a much larger percentage of supervision. It's often sometimes between 20 to 50%. I see my kids all the time, and our services are really effective that way, I think. The other thing is I really struggle with executive functioning as well. And these are all things that honestly, I think if I worked at another company would not be accommodated. And there are also things that I think would probably get me fired. I get behind in paperwork all the time. I forget to fill out my timesheets all the time. I get special reminders to me to fill out my timesheets every month it's been the same worksheet since for like 4 years, and I still cannot seem to do it on time. And sometimes I get like ahead and I'm really excited and I don't make it. Direct supervision notes, very hard for me to do, and I've actually created systems, but that also took energy to create that system to make it easier for myself as well. And the other thing that I have at work that's accommodated is I actually get sensory breaks. And I actually struggled with this when I was going through my diagnostic process, because the first professional I went to that I did not follow up with, this was just like the intake, like, do you want to test? Said, does this impact your work? And I thought, no, not really. But after I left, I thought about the fact that I don't think other professions would allow their supervisor who's interacting in the community with parents or their clients to wear headphones, walk in and say, I am taking a break, take a blanket, cover their desk, hide under the blanket in the dark with their headphones for 10 minutes. And that kind of accommodation is just given to me. I've been seen using the squeeze machines. That's nobody says anything about that, but it doesn't look professional. If I did that on a school campus, it would not be acceptable. And I just happen to work in a location that's extremely supportive, and I don't think I could work in another space because I don't think I would complete the work tasks expected of me. To be entirely honest, my work stamina is not the same, super disorganized. I need a helper to help me do pretty basic tasks as far as that goes. And I'm just really, really fortunate at my location to have those things. And coming out as autistic didn't matter because those were already accommodations that were given to all of our staff. Anybody's allowed to ask for that where I work.
Awesome. It's good to know things can work out, and it seems to just come down to like whether or not we're lucky enough to work in a environment that's supportive of our needs, whether or not, yeah. And like, I don't think it's a thing that's unique to like ABA as a field either. Like it's what I notice with like pretty much all autistic people as well. So yeah, thank you both for sharing your experiences there. I think like we could do an entire panel on just that one question alone, and who knows, maybe we will. So Grant, the final question is for you. Very, very often, I see pushback from BCBAs or parents that ABA really exists for, quote, severe autistics, and those who are doing the pushback aren't actually autistic enough to have a say in, the impact of ABA. How do you feel about the framing around severe autism? And, do you agree with that pushback? And, do you have any advice on how, I guess mild autistic people should advocate in ways that are informed by and honor the needs of autistic people with higher support needs and non-speakers? Y'all are muted, by the way.
Yeah, so we deviated a little, so I'm not sure that this will match entirely, but let's go ahead and play what you wrote, and then you can address Zach's question.
I would like to begin a dialogue about how this. In my opinion, there are areas where we need more stakeholder conversations that guide others in how we want them to show up for us. We need to be more explicit about how the environments we are in causes stress. We need to share more details about how communication privileged people can step in to help. Implementation of supports matters. In a nutshell, I would like to begin a dialogue about how this applies to schools, with professionals, with peers, with family, and with work environments. For instance, I think each person who teaches AAC in schools or therapy settings should consider supporting an AAC user around the clock for 1 week. Only then could you truly appreciate the number of barriers we encounter and have to problem solve our way through every day. I often say I would love a drone to follow me around. Laugh out loud. That sounds extreme, doesn't it? I may sound radical with this idea, yet it is actually not a significant amount of time. Think about that. An AAC user needs to do this every day, often for a lifetime, and they may get minimal, if any, coaching for navigating many of the settings they attend. They may not be interacting with communication partners who understand how they can assist with successful communication. Families struggling may be labeled prone to AAC device abandonment, but I think we can see ways the odds may have been stacked against success. Okay, I know this would be a lot to ask because I know of a few people who have tried this as professionals, and they said they were in tears by the end of the day. But here's the idea. Once you have supported a user for a week, then take another week and try to use AAC to run your life. Make sure you have a few important meetings lined up, and maybe even with a few people you have never met before. The trouble with the professional-only driven approach is that not everyone in the community has had intimate experiences of communication vulnerability, and that may cause assumptions that can further harm individuals who need support.
Do you want anything else?
I. H. Hope. That. W. Was. K. Kind. Of. W. What. U. W. A. Wanted. Z. A. Zach. Dot.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
hope that was kind of what you wanted, Zach.
oh no, that was great. Like, I think, everything you say is like it's super important. Like, it's what we need to hear. And like, there's always so much behind it. And it takes me a while to really be able to contextualize everything you say. So whatever you say, I'm always happy about it. So thank you for, saying what you said. And I'll, think about it more after watching this video.
Great. Exclamation mark.
So, yeah. And then did y'all want to address the last question, or was that the last question answer right there?
Yeah, I think that was his last question.
Okay,
He
cool.
had a bunch of other things, but I think we need to cut it.
Yeah. So we have, okay, it's just about 8 o'clock. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Maybe, are y'all okay if we answer like one audience question before we go? Is that okay? Cool.
How will we choose the best question? I hope everyone thought really carefully about the best question.
And I was going to say, this is Rachel just piping in, that we can try to send some answers to some of the questions in a follow-up email, since we didn't have time to get to all of those questions. So maybe pick one, and then we can try to send follow-up for the rest.
Totally. After the technical difficulty, I can't actually see the questions and answers. So Kaylee, you said you had a list handy?
No pressure, Kaylee, but do you want to pick the best one?
So I think maybe what would make the most sense, I noticed a couple questions kind of around how to identify, I guess, appropriate use of ABA, or, quote unquote, good ABA, and how to know, what that means.
That is a great question. Mm-hmm. We're going to be covering that a little in our third panel, but maybe like Alex A. or Winter Grant, you could put your thoughts in on that. I have a few articles I'm going to try to find on that.
And I think hearing that answer from autistic people is different than hearing that answer from professionals.
True.
How about both?
Right. Oh, well, that's right. Even double.
I mean, my personal opinion on this would be that it's so hard. But I would get involved with communities and I would ask autistics. As a practitioner, I would not dare say, like, trust us, to be honest. We are all trained to certain metrics and things like that, though many of us do things differently. But it is a matter of what is going to work best for the individual, what the goals are, and is the person that you're partnering with, your ABA provider, willing to listen to that, willing to listen to the concerns and fears of the family, but also willing to find all of the different means possible to listen to and to communicate with the individual that the services are being provided. How involved is the family and the client in the treatment planning, in the creation of goals? Who is the provider beholden to? Is it the client or is it the organization that they work for? And just doing some research on that. It's really hard because a lot of families, when they receive a diagnosis, are given a list of potential providers in the area, and you just call until you find the shortest wait list. And I get that, because you're looking for help and you're looking for answers as soon as possible. So we as autistics also need to, be willing, and well, not need to, but can be available as resources within a variety of communities and a variety of ways to sort of be a sounding board. Like these are the people that have a short wait list. Here's what they said when I met with them about an intake, so on and so forth. And like really taking that time, and just because it's the first person that has availability, I would advise caution. Pump the brakes. It's hard, and the wait lists are long, but it's super important to find what's going to be, if ABA is the route that you want to take to support your family member, then it's important to do your homework and know that these people will be potentially in your home and highly involved in everyone's life. So, think.
Yeah.
Tangent.
Great tangent. Thank you. Aylin.
Yeah, I can speak to this. So I guess I have a couple of thoughts about this. One, I've had clients sit in on their own treatment plans. Two, I was mentioning I work in a really supportive place. One of my dreams is to provide like a research project on preference assessments for skill acquisition. We often think of preference assessments as how we're going to provide reinforcement. But honestly, if every day my kid wants to do science last, I have learned, if I let them make their own schedule, that they don't like learning this thing, and I should teach it a different way. And I think that families looking for those, or there's also like ABA for adults who are neurotypical, doing like fitness programs. There's ABA all over the place. But have a list of things that are important to you. What are the skills that you actually want to be taught? What are your no's? What are your yeses? I've had clients that I've done intakes for that never came to us because they decided ABA wasn't for them. And that's fine, because there's other options out there. And we're there if they want us. But I've also had families who, my company does a lot of consent for families as well. So right now, vaccine status was an important conversation that we had in our clinic, because there was a time when we had people dealing with, anyway, because reasons, some people weren't vaccinated yet. And so having conversations with families of do you feel comfortable with an unvaccinated person in your house? When I've worked with queer families, do you want me to find queer literature? When I'm working with people from other cultures, is there a reason I'm teaching this child to eat with a spoon? Don't you eat with your hands? These are all questions that should be, that the family should have rights to asking. And I'd feel fine advocating for them. Does this make sense for you? And is this something you actually want to teach? But families absolutely have a right to that, because it's your therapy. It's not my therapy. It's your therapy. You get to decide if it's a good fit for you. And that's true for any medical professional of do you like them? Do you want to see them when you break your finger? If you don't like them because they have bad sound manner, get a new one.
Totally. Thank you. Grant, what are you thinking? Still typing up a storm, it looks like.
Yeah. So he answered one of the questions. It was a question on the book. It was a question on token economy.
Oh, okay, cool.
And he said, okay, I read the book Drive by Daniel Pink on this topic and loved it. And now he's answering the one on what a good session is.
Okay, awesome.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I C can B W H when I F feel S A F safe A and R E S P E respected. Dot. A great session is a lot of collaboration, and I get to show how reciprocal I can be when I feel safe and respected.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the core right there. And it doesn't seem to happen as often as it should. So thank you, Grant.
I can't think of better words to end on, really.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, thank you, to the panelists so much. Like, this was great. I know y'all, this took a lot out of y'all, and I just appreciate y'all being willing to share your emotional labor to, complete strangers on the internet in hopes that, the community trauma that autistic people encounter will eventually end. So thank you. And I also wanted to thank the audience for being here, listening to our stories and, maybe thinking of ways, things can change and things should change. We're going to have two other panels. The next one is about the experiences of parents, in these conversations and trying to find services. And then the third one is, specifically about services, how to recognize if they're good or not, how to, how to see if it might be what you or your kid needs, and just seeing what's available out there. And also I want to thank the ARC of King County staff members who are helping monitor chat and making sure the webinar was running while I was having tech problems. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and have a great night.
Bye everyone, thank you.